Please welcome to the stage Arthur Meyer!
Thank you, Kevin. Man, you're such a good storyteller. He's so good at telling stories, which I guess makes sense. For the record, I really like Tom Cruise. And I do agree that he's a closeted homosexual, but that could be a good thing, I think. I feel like there's not enough support out there for owning your closeted homosexuality, It's yeah, you go, stay closeted, it's great. So the story I want to tell is a thing about me really liking comedy, wanting to do comedy. So as Kevin mentioned, I'm a writer over at The Tonight Show. But before I've wanted to do comedy since I was a kid. But before that, I wanted to be a basketball player. And I was pretty good at basketball when I was a kid. I really actually thought that I could be in the NBA one day. And then I saw this movie called Hoop Dreams with my friend Andrew. And it's a really great documentary if you haven't seen it. It's two, inner city Chicago teenagers who have very hard lives, but you just see how much they love basketball. And I was so inspired by that movie. When I was done, Andrew and I were walking home, and I was like, oh man, I can really feel it. I'm gonna be in the NBA one day. And I was like, do you think I'm good enough to be in the NBA? And Andrew was like, no. And I was like, well, what about, I was like, wait, well, why not? I mean, why can't I be in the NBA? I love basketball and I'm good at it. He's like, yeah, you're good, but it's so hard to get in the NBA. So I was like, well, what about college basketball? And Andrew was like, no. And I was like, come on, I'm definitely college basketball level good. And he said, I actually don't think you are. And I said, well, what about high school basketball? And he said, probably not. So he was right on all three counts. I never did that. So around age 10 or 11, I was kind of starting to think, oh man, maybe I should look for something else to do. So for my 11th birthday, May 13th, 1995, I had a bunch of friends over for a sleepover, and we watched Saturday Night Live, and I became hooked. I was transfixed by this show. I had seen it a couple times before, but something about being there with my friends and watching it really clicked into place to me. It was just, I loved all the different, how they would do all these different sketches every night or every week, and all the different cast members, and it was such a fun show. And I became so obsessed with the show that I would watch it, I would tape it and watch it every week. And I bought these books about Saturday Night Live, and that listed all the dates in them, and I started memorizing, I just looked at the book so much that I memorized the dates of the episodes. So and this still exists to this day. I could tell you, April 11th, 1992, Sharon Stone hosted with musical guest Pearl Jam. And that obviously, I could have memorized that, but it's, I could have, memorized that right before I went up here. I've known that since I was, 12 years old. But, if you want, you could even just, so you know how obsessed I was, if you want to mention someone who's hosted the show, I think I could do it from, 1975 to 2006. Anyone, yell out a host or yell out a date or a musical guest or something? What was it? Alec Baldwin. Okay, Alec Baldwin. So his first time hosting was April 19th, 1990, with musical guest the B-52s. And again, this is true. What's that? Michael Jordan, September 28th, 1991. Musical guest Public Enemy, special guests Spike Lee and the Reverend Jesse Jackson. I love that you guys trust that I'm not making this up. It just it sounds correct, doesn't it?
Power station.
All right, I'm done doing it. Okay, so anyway, I was obsessed with SNL. I was inspired to do comedy. I was a very tenacious child, but I didn't really know how to, I didn't know how I should do comedy. But I just started trying to be funny all the time, and I was constantly trying to be funny, which was very annoying for people. There's nothing more annoying than a kid trying to be funny, because he hasn't developed his sense of humor yet. So I'm just doing voices and walking around the house, fucking clapping and whistling and doing voices and stuff. And I wasn't funny. But I really thought I was. I believed in myself. And my Aunt Fran, she one time told me that she's Arthur, 1 out of every 4 things you say is funny. And she meant it as an insult, but I took it as a compliment. Because I was just trying to be funny all the time. I'm like, that means like, okay, I'm like awake for 16 hours. That means like 4 hours a day I'm funny. That's like 4 comedy albums every day that I'm coming out with. 4 of the shittiest comedy albums. But my parents were encouraging of me. My mom encouraged, whatever sort of instinct I had, which is very wonderful. My dad was encouraging, but he was more practical. He didn't think that it was a practical idea to try to become a comedian, which it's not. It's you just don't know if you'll, do it or anything. And he would tell me stuff like, he'd be like, there are funny rabbis out there. And I was, instead of that like bumming me out, I was like, no, I don't want to do that. I want to be a comedian, Dad. He's like, great. So I tried to figure out a way to do comedy, and I started in 6th grade was really when I started watching SNL, and this is when they had like Will Ferrell was in the cast. This was his first season, and Sherry O'Terry and Jim Breuer and Molly Shannon. This was all their first years in the cast, and I would get up in front of my class, and there was a magazine called Comedy Magazine, which no longer exists, and they would like transcribe some of the late night talk show host monologue jokes. And I would write those down and then tell them in front of the class as though I'd made them up. So I basically was stealing my material, which who cares if you're like that old? It doesn't really matter. And I would write stories and force my classmates to listen to them, but they would be stories that would incorporate them into them. But I would use jokes that I had heard on SNL that I didn't even know what the jokes meant. So there was one joke I mentioned basically something about one of my classmates being quote, hung like a horse. And I didn't know what it meant, but I got a big laugh on SNL. And like my 6th grade teacher, Miss McCarty, had to like talk to me about that. But then it's sort of like all like clicked into place one night. I was like, because I want to be on SNL, I know what I'll do. I'll start a live sketch comedy show with my older sister Elaine, 1 year older, my younger sister Adele, 2.5 years younger, and we will perform it every Saturday night in front of my parents in our living room. And we will perform it not at 8:30 p.m., but at the much funnier 8:31 p.m. So my parents didn't really have anything else to do except sit down and watch the show. I mean, and my mom was happy to do that. She was more than happy to just like indulge us, and we would write, we would write these sketches, and my dad wasn't ever very excited about it. He didn't look forward. He would sit and watch it and like be a good sport, but he didn't ever like want to do it. So we would write, my sisters and I would write sketches. I think I wrote the bulk of them, and early on, we would memorize the lines and then perform them in our living room in front of my parents. We didn't have camcorders or anything, so there are a couple of photos of it somewhere, which I remember being annoyed that they were taking photos during it. I'm like, we got to do the show. This isn't a photo session, We got to do this show. And we would wear costumes, and we would make wigs we would color 8.5 by 11-inch papers like brown if we needed a Geraldo wig or something, and I would like scotch tape it to my forehead, and we tried to make it as much like SNL as possible. So we had a Weekend Update type segment, which my sister called Meyer Enlightenment. And we would tell news stories, news jokes, and then we had our big like line at the beginning of every show. And I was from Wilmette, Illinois, so I was a suburb of Chicago, and the big line was, "Live from Wilmette, it's Meijer Kids Night!" This show was Meijer Kids Night, and I was like, I think I like always made sure that I was the one to say the line, which my sisters didn't care about. They were like happy to like go along with it, and I think it was a little fun for them for a little bit, but they were like, yeah, go ahead, say the line. So. My mom liked it, my dad didn't like it, and and I remember the one time my dad he actually only laughed one time ever at Meijer Kids Night. There was one time, and here's what happened. So we had been doing the show for several months, every week, you know. That's like way too many shows. And my sisters started getting a little bit lazy about memorizing their lines, and they were like, can't we just read it off the paper? And I said, no. This is Meyer Kids Night. We are professional. We do not read off paper. And they're like, well, we're not going to memorize our lines, so, you know. And I was like, okay, fine, I'll write cue cards. So I wrote out cue cards, and I set them up against the furniture. And so, you know, we'd be performing these sketches and kind of like looking down and like reading every line like that. And we're in the middle of the Ricki Lake sketch, okay? My little sister's playing Ricki Lake, Adele, and it's her line, and it's right there in the cue card, and she doesn't read, she doesn't see that it's her line, you know? We're live, you know? This is a big deal. And my dad starts laughing because something's going wrong. And I'm like, come on. And I'm like, Adele, it's your line. Say your line. So she finally says her line. Whatever, we did the sketch. It was all right. I don't know. I'm still a little bit embarrassed about how that went. But then then like, you know, we would continue doing the sketches. These were all just like SNL, just like rip-off sketches. Like, you know how SNL had the the Da Bears guys? I really wanted Meyer Kids Night to have like a big catchphrase. So I thought of a catchphrase, which honestly, this does make me embarrassed to say it, but it's like a big Chicago guy, and he's hosting a cooking TV show, and instead of saying superb, he goes, schwaperb. Schwaperb. And in the sketch, I wrote that like 45 times to like really hammer home that it was a catchphrase. If you guys, after tonight, feel like saying schwaperb more, please do. It would be awesome if it finally caught on. I didn't even think about that till now, but it could still catch on. But then I could kind of feel the show going downhill a little bit. And then we did an ER sketch one night, and I had to use, fake blood, obviously, for the sketch. So the sketch starts, and I'm laying on a love seat, and my dad sees that we're using ketchup for blood. And he stops the sketch live. And he goes, what the hell are you doing? You can't use ketchup. You're going to get it all over the love seat. And I'm like, what are you doing? This is Meyer Kids Night. He's like, I don't care about Meyer Kids Night. And I was like, I don't care about ruining the love seat. And the show just didn't happen that night. It was horrible. And then that was kind of like, it sort of ended there. We didn't do it again until like 2 years later, when I had an idea. I was like, oh my God, a Meyer Kids Night reunion show. I was in high school at this point, which is like way too old to be performing in front of my parents in the living room. And I asked my sisters, I said, will you do Meyer Kids Night? And my little sister, Adele, was like, okay, fine, I guess I'll do the reunion show. My sister, Elaine, said she would only do it if I gave her $20. Which is a lot of money when you're a kid. I mean, I still think of $20 as a lot. Like, if you have $20, it feels great. But I probably at that time had like, 35 total dollars or something. I don't know how much money I had. So I was like, geez, this is a big like financial decision. I know my dad is good with finances and stuff. So I went to my dad and I was like, hey, Dad, I really want to get this like Meyer Kids Night reunion show going. And Adele's like totally in, And Elaine said she would like only do the show if I gave her $20. So I was just going to you to see if that's like a good business decision or something. So just like, let me know what you think. And my dad just goes, no, don't do it. Don't do it. Don't. And I'm like, because it's a bad money decision? And he's like, just trust me, don't do it. So that's basically how the story ends. But here is kind of an exciting thing that just happened. So both my sisters live in Brooklyn now, and I live in Brooklyn too. We all live right near each other, and they're wonderful people. And my little sister and I just came up with an idea recently that we're gonna start a cover band. It's a band, and the name of the band is Sisters. And this is like a big announcement for me, by the way. This would be like Tom Cruise coming out of the closet. We're starting a band called Sisters, and it's spelled Cisters, and we're only doing covers of bands whose names begin with the letter C. So like Chicago and Cake, Coldplay, Creedence Clearwater and stuff. So, we're never going to perform these songs. Like, we just had our first practice recently, and we record all the songs on GarageBand and use GarageBand instrumentation. But if I ever see you or anything and you want me to, email you a song, I'll do that. Or you could email me. My email is arthurmeyer13@gmail.com. That's ARTHUR. MEYER 13, like the number 13, at gmail.com. And there's just one last thing I want to say to you guys. Live from Wilmette, it's Meyer Kids Night! Thank you guys.